Welcome to Mill History Talk, the podcast where strategy meets storytelling, unpacking the drama, decisions, and disasters of war so you understand not just what happened, but why it still matters. The views expressed on Mill History Talk are those of the hosts, writers, and guests, and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any government agency, military organization, or institution. This podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only. Picture the Pacific Ocean at midnight. No moon, no lights, no friendly coastline. Just millions of square miles of black water. And somewhere out there, a Japanese convoy is carrying oil, ammunition, aircraft parts, food, replacement troops, and everything else an empire needs to stay alive. Beneath the surface, an American submarine is waiting. The captain raises the periscope. The target moves into view. The range is closing. The firing solution is perfect. Fire. The torpedoes race toward the target, and then do absolutely nothing. Because apparently, the United States Navy entered the Second World War with a torpedo designed by the same people who make printers that refuse to print because the cyan cartridge is empty.
That was not the official Bureau of Ordnance explanation.
No. The official explanation was that the submarine commanders were probably doing it wrong.
Which was considerably worse.
Much worse. Because when several dozen trained submarine officers report that your weapon is running too deep, exploding too soon, or striking enemy ships without detonating, the correct response is not, "Have the sailors considered aiming better?"
And yet, for nearly 2 years, that was essentially the institutional response.
Of course it was. So this is the story of how the United States submarine force went to war with defective weapons, divided commands, cautious doctrine, inadequate bases, and captains trained to avoid risk, and then adapted into one of the most effective instruments of maritime warfare in history.
It is also the story of how Japan conquered an enormous resource empire,
but forgot that owning oil fields is not the same thing as getting the oil home.
Exactly.
Welcome to Logistics, everyone. Brian has been waiting 75 episodes for this moment.
I have been remarkably patient.
You mention logistics in every episode.
And history has repeatedly vindicated me.
He has charts.
Several, as a matter of fact.
Of course you do. This is Mill History Talk. Let's dive. Welcome to episode 76 of Mill History Talk, the podcast where history is not dusty. It is drama, strategy, institutional dysfunction, and occasionally a multi-million-dollar torpedo that hits an enemy ship and politely declines to explode. I'm Hope.
And I'm Brian.
Today we are talking about the American submarine campaign against Japan in the Second World War, how it began, how badly it initially went, how the force adapted, and how American submarines eventually strangled the maritime transportation system holding the Japanese empire together.
The submarine campaign is often overshadowed by carrier battles, amphibious invasions, and strategic bombing.
Because aircraft carriers are dramatic.
They are.
Flight decks, explosions, dive bombers, admirals pointing at maps, dramatic orchestral music, Charlton Heston staring at the horizon.
Submarines offered fewer opportunities for visible spectacle.
Except from inside the submarine.
From inside, the experience could be extremely violent.
Right. And submarine crews also spent long patrols sealed inside cramped steel cylinders, filled with diesel fumes, machinery oil, canned food, batteries, wet clothing, and dozens of men who had not seen a shower recently. So, essentially, a very dangerous college dormitory.
With torpedoes.
Which most colleges discourage.
Most.
But beneath the humor is a central strategic reality. Japan was an island nation conducting an industrial war across a vast maritime empire. It needed ships to move oil, iron ore, bauxite, rubber, food, ammunition, troops, aircraft, spare parts, and fuel.
Japan's military and economy depended upon an extended maritime transportation system. Resources had to move from Southeast Asia and the occupied territories to the home islands. Supplies and reinforcements then had to move outward to Japan's overseas garrisons.
The Japanese Empire was basically a giant military subscription service. Everything worked only while the deliveries kept arriving.
American submarines progressively canceled that subscription.
Aggressively. And without issuing a refund. Brian, here is the first strange part of the story. The United States built submarines that were almost perfectly suited to attacking Japanese commerce.
But did not initially develop a doctrine centered upon commerce destruction.
Because pre-war naval planning was dominated by War Plan Orange.
War Plan Orange was the evolving American plan for a possible conflict with Japan. Most versions anticipated a Japanese offensive at the beginning of the war, followed by an American advance westward across the Pacific. The United States would relieve or recapture threatened positions and eventually bring the Japanese fleet into a decisive naval engagement.
Very Mahan.
Very Mahan.
Did Brian just invoke Mahan before I invoked Clausewitz?
I wanted to establish control of the intellectual sea lanes.
That was terrible.
I stand by it.
Okay. Moving on. Submarines were expected to scout ahead of the fleet, report Japanese movements, attack major combatants, and weaken the enemy before the decisive surface battle.
They were conceived primarily as auxiliaries to the battle fleet.
So the submarine was a supporting character.
Essentially,
The competent supporting character who spends the first act warning everyone that the main plan is deeply flawed.
that comparison is more accurate than I would prefer.
I'll take it.
The Navy consequently developed the Fleet submarine. These were large, fast, long-range boats designed to operate across the immense distances of the Pacific. The Tambor class established the essential wartime configuration, and the Gato class refined it.
Gato-class submarines displaced about 1,500 tons on the surface. They carried 10 torpedo tubes, 6 forward and 4 aft, and usually carried 24 torpedoes.
They had a surface cruising range of roughly 11 to 12,000 nautical miles. That range allowed them to operate deep in Japanese-controlled waters from bases such as Pearl Harbor.
And they had air conditioning.
They did.
This matters, because without air conditioning, a submarine operating in tropical waters becomes a sealed steel tube filled with men, batteries, electrical equipment, engine heat, humidity, and enough accumulated body odor to qualify as a chemical weapon.
The Hague Convention did not address submarine laundry.
An oversight.
Definitely. Air conditioning was not merely a comfort feature. It helped preserve sensitive electrical and electronic equipment and allowed crews to remain effective during extended tropical patrols. Refrigeration, freshwater distillation, and greater internal volume also made long deployments possible.
So the United States had developed a submarine with the range, endurance, speed, and weapons capacity needed for independent commerce raiding. But doctrine had not caught up with the design.
Correct. Peacetime exercises emphasized attacks against warships. Artificial training conditions rewarded caution, procedural correctness, and avoidance of detection. Many officers entered the war believing that aircraft, sonar, and depth charges had made aggressive surface operations prohibitively dangerous.
The Navy built the Millennium Falcon, but trained everyone to operate it like they were taking a state driving test.
There were significantly more checklists.
There always are.
Pre-war international law also constrained the mission. The London Naval Treaty required submarines to observe prize rules similar to those imposed upon surface warships. A submarine was not supposed to sink a merchant vessel without first placing the crew and passengers in safety, unless the ship resisted or attempted to escape.
Which sounds reasonable until you picture a submarine surfacing next to an enemy merchant ship in waters filled with aircraft, escorts, radios, and possibly hidden deck guns.
It was nearly impossible to conduct an effective commerce war under those restrictions.
Then, Pearl Harbor changed everything.
Within hours of the Japanese attack on December 7, 1941, the Pacific Submarine Force received orders to conduct unrestricted submarine warfare against Japan.
No warning, no inspection. Japanese merchant shipping was now a primary target.
The submarine force shifted almost instantly from supporting the battle fleet to conducting an independent offensive against Japanese maritime communications.
But the boats were the only part of the force remotely ready for that mission. The doctrine was wrong. The command structure was divided. The base system was fragile. The weapons had not been tested properly, and many commanders had been conditioned to avoid tactical risk.
The United States had the physical platform for the campaign, but not yet the complete operational system.
So the Navy announced a complete corporate reorganization on Monday morning and expected the new strategy to begin by lunch.
During an enemy offensive,
with the regional headquarters burning.
and the principal weapon malfunctioning.
Excellent. The opening crisis was especially severe in the Philippines. At the beginning of the war, 29 American submarines were assigned to the Asiatic Fleet.
On December 10, 1941, Japanese aircraft attacked the Cavite Navy Yard. The attack devastated submarine repair and support facilities and sank USS Sea Lion while she was undergoing overhaul.
The remaining submarines dispersed to sea and attempted to interfere with Japanese landings and shipping around the Philippines.
But the campaign unfolded amid confused orders, uncertain intelligence, defensive missions, and the rapid collapse of the theater. As Japanese forces advanced, American submarines withdrew through the Netherlands East Indies.
They operated temporarily from Surabaya and Cilacap.
But those bases also became untenable.
So every time the submarine force unpacked its equipment, the Japanese advance forced it to move again.
Eventually, Brisbane supported operations in the Southwest Pacific, while Fremantle in Western Australia became the principal American submarine base south of the equator.
Fremantle was secure and beyond the normal reach of Japanese land-based aviation, but it was far from many patrol areas and initially lacked the repair and support infrastructure needed for a major submarine force.
Submarine tenders, Australian shipyards, local labor, repair units, supply organizations, and improvised shore facilities gradually transformed the port.
During the war, 127 American submarines conducted 353 patrols from Fremantle. That was about 1/4 of all American submarine patrols in the Pacific.
Fremantle became one of the logistical pillars of the campaign.
And because this is a Brian episode, let us pause to admire the phrase logistical pillar.
It is an excellent phrase.
He's glowing.
I am not.
You absolutely are. I love it. Now, back to the history. Rebuilding the base system did not solve the submarine force's most serious problem: the Mark 14 torpedo.
And the Mark 6 exploder.
This weapon had 3 major defects. Not 1, not 2, 3. It ran too deep, the magnetic exploder detonated too early, and the contact exploder sometimes failed when the torpedo actually hit the target.
The defects overlapped and concealed one another. A torpedo that passed beneath a ship could be blamed on an inaccurate firing solution. A premature explosion could be mistaken for a hit. A torpedo that struck without detonating might be attributed to a poor impact angle.
And because the submarine commander was observing through a periscope, often while escorts were preparing to drop explosives on his head, he did not have the luxury of conducting a forensic investigation.
Early patrol reports therefore frequently overstated results. For example, during December 1941, Asiatic Fleet submarines conducted 45 attacks and fired 96 torpedoes. Wartime assessments credited them with 11 ships sunk. Post-war analysis confirmed only 3.
3.
3.
That is not a minor statistical adjustment. That is the difference between successful opening campaign and we have a serious problem.
The material cause was the torpedo. The institutional cause was the refusal to accept the evidence.
The Bureau of Ordnance had developed the Mark 14 in secrecy and had not subjected the complete weapon to adequate, realistic testing. When commanders reported failures, Bureau officials initially blamed the crews, maintenance practices, or tactical errors.
The organization responsible for developing the weapon was also responsible for evaluating criticism of it.
Which is always a wonderfully objective arrangement. Did we make a mistake? No. Who investigated? We did. Excellent. Meeting adjourned.
The minutes will reflect unanimous confidence.
Exactly.
Operational commanders eventually developed their own tests. Experiments in Australia demonstrated that the Mark 14 commonly ran about 11 feet deeper than its selected setting.
11 feet is not a rounding error.
Number.
That is an entire additional person standing on another person beneath the torpedo.
An unusual but technically understandable unit of measurement.
Thank you. Correcting the depth problem revealed that the Mark 6 magnetic exploder was also unreliable. Changes in magnetic conditions caused premature detonations or failures. In June 1943, Rear Admiral Charles Lockwood ordered the magnetic feature disabled throughout the Pacific Fleet submarine force.
That forced submarines to rely on the contact exploder.
And that exposed defect number 3.
On July 24, 1943, USS Tenosa, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Lawrence Daspit, encountered the 19,000-ton tanker Tonin Maru No. 3. Daspit achieved an excellent firing position against the slow-moving target. He attacked repeatedly.
15 torpedoes. Several struck almost squarely. Most failed to detonate.
The tanker survived.
15 torpedoes! At that point, the problem was no longer theoretical. It was sitting on the surface of the Pacific with multiple dents in its hull.
Daspit returned to Pearl Harbor with one remaining torpedo and compelling evidence. Lockwood ordered Captain Charles Swede Momsen and other specialists to conduct additional tests.
Torpedoes were fired into the cliffs of Kahulaway and recovered from the seabed.
The tests showed that during a near-perpendicular impact, the heavy firing pin and its guide structure distorted. Instead of striking the detonator, the mechanism bound and failed.
So the impact angle engineers considered ideal was actually more likely to produce a dud.
Correct.
That is almost literary. The weapon performs perfectly in theory, meets reality, and immediately experiences friction. Clausewitz.
And there it is.
You knew it was coming.
I hope we might reach the midpoint.
Never.
Pearl Harbor technicians developed lighter, stronger firing pins, some made from metal recovered from Japanese aircraft propellers. By September 1943, the force had identified and field-corrected all 3 major defects.
21 months after the war began.
21 months.
And this was not merely a technical embarrassment.
Weapons reliability affects operational confidence. A commander who repeatedly fires defective torpedoes begins to question his firing solution, his crew, his tactics, and eventually his own judgment.
A commander already inclined toward caution becomes even less willing to close the enemy.
Exactly. The torpedo problem influenced leadership, tactics, morale, and the strategic output of the entire force.
Modern lesson number 1. Test the complete weapon under realistic conditions, not just the components, not just the computer model, not just the presentation slide where every arrow is green.
And when operational units report repeated failure, investigate the equipment before assuming the operators are incompetent.
A radical proposal. Listen to the people being shot at. Fixing the torpedo was only part of the transformation. The Navy also had to change the command culture. Rear Admiral Charles Lockwood assumed command of the Pacific Fleet Submarine Force in January 1943, after Rear Admiral Robert English died in an aircraft accident. Lockwood combined technical curiosity, concern for his crews, and an insistence on offensive results.
He pressed the torpedo investigation, strengthened the relationship between headquarters and deployed boats, and treated patrol reports as tools for professional learning. He also continued the difficult process of relieving commanders who failed to demonstrate sufficient initiative or aggressiveness.
That process was necessary, but it should not be treated casually. These were trained officers whose careers could end because they failed to adapt quickly enough to combat conditions.
Correct. Submarine command required a difficult balance. A commander who was too cautious could preserve his boat while achieving little. A commander who was reckless could lose the submarine and everyone aboard.
The requirement was disciplined aggression.
Yes.
Which brings us to Dudley Mush Morton and USS Wahoo.
Morton became the most visible symbol of the new offensive culture. When he assumed command, he told the crew that their purpose was to sink enemy shipping and that the boat was expendable in accomplishing that mission, although reasonable precautions would be taken.
That is inspiring, in the same way a speech before the final battle in a fantasy series is inspiring. You feel motivated, but you also start wondering which characters will survive the episode.
Morton and his executive officer, Richard O'Kane, aggressively entered confined waters, attacked convoys at close range, and pressed repeated attacks. During a later patrol in the shallow Yellow Sea, Wahoo sank 9 confirmed ships.
Japanese authorities believed an entire submarine group was operating in the area.
It was one boat.
One extremely angry boat.
Morton's willingness to accept risk sometimes approached imprudence. His example should not be simplified into a celebration of recklessness.
But Wahoo showed what could happen when a capable commander trusted his crew, closed the target, and kept attacking.
O'Kane later applied lessons learned aboard Wahoo during his own highly successful command of USS Tang. Other commanders, including Samuel Dealey, Lawson Ramage, Eugene Fluckey, and George Street, developed distinct approaches suited to their boats and patrol areas.
The point was not to manufacture identical captains.
The force needed officers who understood common operational principles but could exercise independent judgment.
Mission command beneath the ocean.
Correct.
You sounded happy.
I am.
I knew it. Aggressive commanders still needed to find targets. The Pacific is enormous.
Communications intelligence became a major force multiplier. American codebreakers frequently obtained information about convoy routes, schedules, speeds, tanker movements, and Japanese fleet operations.
Headquarters could move submarines toward likely interception points instead of sending them to search blindly across thousands of miles of ocean.
But intelligence did not automatically produce tactical success. A submarine still had to reach the correct position, detect the target, penetrate its defenses, develop a firing solution, attack, and escape.
Fast carriers, battleships, and cruisers could simply pass beyond reach if the submarine was badly positioned.
Headquarters sometimes diverted submarines away from productive merchant routes to pursue major warships that proved impossible to intercept.
Because admirals like battleships.
They do.
Economies like oil.
They require it.
A carrier might be the glamorous target. A tanker might be the strategically valuable target.
Precisely.
Radar helped close the gap between intelligence and tactical opportunity.
The SD air search radar entered service in 1941. The more useful SJ surface search radar began appearing in 1942. By early 1943, most American fleet submarines on patrol carried radar.
The SJ set provided range and bearing against surface contacts. A submarine could find and track a convoy at night or in poor visibility.
A surfaced submarine could then use its speed to conduct an end-around, maneuvering ahead of the convoy before submerging for a daylight attack or attacking from the surface at night.
This changed the submarine from a purely submerged ambush weapon into a fast, mobile night predator.
Japanese radar and radar warning capabilities lagged behind American systems. For much of the war, an American submarine could track a convoy electronically without being accurately detected in return.
Batman.
No.
Darkness. Advanced technology. Surprise attacks. A low silhouette. A crew operating from a hidden lair.
Submarines did not have capes.
True, capes would have been a serious machinery hazard.
Thank you.
Still Batman.
We will move on.
By late 1943, the United States also began experimenting with coordinated attack groups, small wolf packs.
American wolf packs differed from the German Atlantic model. They normally contained only a few boats, and individual commanding officers retained considerable tactical independence. The purpose was primarily coordinated search.
Several submarines covered adjacent areas, exchanged contact reports, and converged on detected shipping.
Early groups experienced communications problems and concern that radio transmissions might reveal their positions. But the concept allowed submarines to concentrate effort along important routes without surrendering decentralized command.
So it was a group chat.
With security concerns.
And torpedoes.
Yes.
By 1944, the pieces had come together. Reliable torpedoes, more aggressive commanders, better intelligence, radar-directed tactics, coordinated search groups, more submarines, and forward bases.
During 1944, the force gained 33 boats, even after combat losses. It generated approximately 520 war patrols, compared with about 350 in 1943.
American industrial capacity turned tactical adaptation into a sustained, theater-wide campaign.
The Gato class represented the standard early war fleet submarine. The succeeding Balao class preserved the basic configuration while incorporating wartime improvements.
The Balao class had a stronger pressure hull and a rated test depth of about 400 feet.
That greater depth provided additional protection against depth charge attacks and gave commanders more room to evade escorts. Radar and other sensors were more fully integrated into the design. The sail and bridge structures were reduced to create a smaller surface silhouette.
Later boats also received larger deck guns and improved anti-aircraft weapons as surface operations became more common.
Standardization mattered as much as individual technical improvement. Similar boats simplified training, maintenance, logistics, and personnel transfers.
Which brings us again to the secret protagonist of the Pacific War.
Logistics.
I was going to say spare parts.
Spare parts or logistics.
You have an answer for everything.
Only when the answer is logistics.
Submarine tenders carried machine shops, torpedoes, food, replacement parts, and technicians.
They allowed major repairs to occur far from continental shipyards and enabled the force to move forward as the Allied advance continued.
Pearl Harbor remained the intellectual and logistical center of the Pacific Fleet submarine war.
Lockwood's headquarters combined code-breaking, patrol reports, operational research, and theater priorities to assign patrol areas. Pearl Harbor also supported training, repair, torpedo preparation, and crew relief.
As the Central Pacific Offensive advanced, submarine tenders and facilities moved to Majuro, Saipan, and Guam.
Shorter transit distances meant more days on station and fewer days traveling between base and patrol area.
In the Southwest Pacific, Fremantle and Brisbane supported operations around the Netherlands East Indies, the South China Sea, and the Philippines.
Fremantle also demonstrates that the campaign depended upon coalition infrastructure. Australian workers, naval personnel, hospitals, repair facilities, supply systems, and transportation networks sustained the American force. Australian commandos participated in covert missions. Dutch submarines operated under Allied command. British submarines began operating from Western Australia in 1944.
The submarine may have fought alone beneath the surface, but it was backed by thousands of people ashore.
A deployed combat platform is only the visible edge of a much larger system.
And Japan's system was increasingly in trouble. Japan entered the war without an adequate system for protecting its merchant fleet.
The Army, Navy, and civilian authorities controlled separate shipping pools and competed for tonnage. Merchant vessels often sailed independently or in small, weakly protected groups. Convoy procedures, escort doctrine, radar, sonar, communications, and air coverage remained uneven.
Even after Japan created the Grand Escort Command in late 1943, it did not have enough escorts, aircraft, trained crews, or modern sensors to protect the empire's enormous maritime perimeter.
Geography intensified the vulnerability. Shipping from the southern resource area had to pass through a limited number of channels. The South China Sea and Luzon Strait became especially productive patrol areas.
Traffic from Borneo, Sumatra, Malaya, Indochina, and the Philippines converged there.
American submarines used intelligence and coordinated search to concentrate at those choke points.
And then they attacked the tankers. The tanker campaign was devastating.
Oil was essential for fleet operations, aviation training, merchant transportation, vehicles, and industrial production. Tankers were slow, difficult to replace, and valuable enough to justify determined attacks even when heavily escorted.
A loaded tanker carried two strategic targets: the ship itself
And the oil cargo.
Sink an empty tanker returning south, and you still reduce the ability to move the next shipment.
Exactly.
It is the difference between stealing someone's groceries and destroying the delivery truck.
A useful analogy.
Thank you. I also accept awards in the form of coffee.
Noted.
By 1944, the impact was unmistakable.
American submarine commanders claimed more than 5 million tons of enemy shipping during the year. Post-war comparison with Japanese records reduced the confirmed figure to about 603 vessels, totaling roughly 2.7 million tons.
That corrected figure still exceeded all confirmed submarine sinkings from 1941 through 1943 combined.
Japanese bulk imports fell from approximately 16.4 million tons in 1943 to about 10 million tons in 1944. Excluding tankers, Japan began 1944 with roughly 4.1 million tons of merchant shipping. By the end of the year, only about 2 million tons remained.
Half.
Approximately.
And the losses went beyond the ships that sank.
Convoys moved more slowly than independent vessels. Ships waited in port while escorts assembled. Zigzagging and indirect routes consumed additional fuel. Damaged ships required lengthy repairs. Experienced merchant mariners were killed.
Escorts, aircraft, minesweepers, and patrol boats assigned to anti-submarine defense could not be used elsewhere.
The submarine campaign reduced the efficiency of the entire transportation system.
Japan still controlled oil fields, mines, plantations, ports, and occupied territories, but without shipping, those possessions became strategically hollow.
Territorial control did not equal effective sea power.
And now we return to Alfred Thayer Mahan.
I knew you would be pleased.
Mahan is often remembered as the battleship guy. Big fleets, decisive engagements, very serious men with impressive facial hair discussing command of the sea.
His broader theory was more complex. Mahan linked sea power to commerce, merchant shipping, overseas positions, naval forces, and control of maritime communications.
American submarines did not win one giant undersea Trafalgar. They conducted thousands of dispersed attacks that gradually disconnected Japan's empire from its industrial base.
The campaign departed from a narrow, battleship-centered interpretation of Mahan while fulfilling his larger theory.
In streaming terms, Japan still owned the premium content, but lost the internet connection.
Mahan would probably have phrased that differently.
Merchant shipping remained the central target. But American submarines also shaped major fleet operations and performed missions that went far beyond sinking cargo ships.
Between late 1943 and the end of 1944, American submarines sank a remarkable series of Japanese fleet, light, escort, and converted carriers. The precise total depends upon which converted transports and carrier-type vessels are included. But the submarine contribution was substantial.
And some of those attacks changed naval battles before the main fleets even saw one another.
During the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, USS Albacore sank the carrier Taiho. USS Kavala sank Shokaku, one of the veteran carriers that had participated in the Pearl Harbor attack.
Kavala was on her first patrol.
It was. Lieutenant Commander Herman Kostler sighted the Japanese carrier force, transmitted a contact report, maneuvered ahead of the formation, and fired 6 torpedoes. Multiple hits eventually doomed Shokaku.
So the submarine's first contribution was information.
Correct. The report helped establish the location and movement of the Japanese force. The attack came afterward.
Intelligence first, position second, weapons third.
A sequence occasionally overlooked by people who prefer to begin every military story with an explosion.
Explosions do have excellent marketing departments.
They do.
Then there was USS Archerfish and the carrier Shinano.
On November 29, 1944, Commander Joseph Enright tracked Shinano, anticipated its route, and gained a firing position. He fired 6 torpedoes. 4 struck.
Shinano had been converted from a Yamato-class battleship hull and was the largest aircraft carrier yet constructed.
But size was not the same thing as readiness. The ship had departed before completing trials, watertight preparation, and crew training. Inadequate damage control readiness contributed significantly to its loss.
The largest carrier in the world went to sea before quality assurance had finished checking the doors.
That is an informal, but defensible, summary.
I will take it.
Submarines also shaped the approach to Leyte Gulf. In October 1944, USS Darter and USS Dace intercepted Vice Admiral Takeo Kurida's center force in the Palawan Passage. Darter sank the heavy cruiser Atago, Kurida's flagship, and damaged Takao. Dace sank the cruiser Maya.
The attack occurred before the main surface battles.
Yes, it disrupted Japanese command arrangements, removed 2 heavy cruisers, and forced a third out of the operation.
Which means the submarines altered the battle before the battleships, carriers, and cruisers reached the main event.
Reconnaissance and interdiction can shape a battle before the principal forces make contact.
And submarines were not limited to attacking ships.
During carrier strikes, submarines took station near Japanese-held islands and the home islands to rescue downed aviators.
Those lifeguard missions placed the boats close to aircraft, patrol vessels, minefields, and shore defenses.
Submariners rescued hundreds of American airmen during the war. Those rescues returned highly trained personnel to friendly control, and many later returned to combat.
Submarines also landed and recovered coast watchers, intelligence agents, commandos, and reconnaissance teams.
They delivered weapons, radios, ammunition, medical supplies, and other material to guerrilla forces. They evacuated military personnel and civilians. They also laid mines in harbors, straits, and coastal routes.
And a mine kept working after the submarine had left.
Exactly. It forced Japan to sweep routes, divert vessels, and treat an apparently empty stretch of water as a continuing threat.
Then there was USS Barb.
Under Commander Eugene Fluckey, Barb attacked coastal shipping, shore installations, and transportation infrastructure. In July 1945, members of the crew landed on the Japanese coast, and placed an explosive charge beneath a railway line.
A submarine crew landed in Japan and destroyed a train.
Yes.
Because apparently, sinking ships no longer provided sufficient professional challenge.
The operation demonstrated how freely American submarines could operate near Japan during the final months of the war.
In 1942, American submarines had been retreating from collapsing bases with unreliable torpedoes. By 1945, submariners were going ashore in Japan to demolish rail lines.
That contrast captures the scale of the force's transformation.
But transformation and strategic success came at an extraordinary human cost. Submarine patrols combined long periods of monotony with moments of overwhelming danger.
Death charge attacks produced violent shock, flooding, damaged equipment, electrical failures, and the psychological strain of remaining silent while escorts searched overhead. Mines, aircraft, surface gunfire, collisions, mechanical failures, and grounding were constant threats. And the crew could not simply abandon a damaged submarine and wait safely for assistance. In most patrol areas, the ocean itself was part of the danger.
In two particularly tragic cases, USS Tullabee and USS Tang were sunk by circular running torpedoes fired from their own tubes.
Richard O'Kane and several members of Tang's crew survived the sinking and Japanese captivity. Most of the crew did not.
A weapon intended for the enemy circled back toward the men who had fired it.
52 American submarines were lost during the Second World War. 48 were lost to combat or operational causes in the Pacific. More than 3,500 American submariners died.
Because the submarine force was relatively small, those losses represented an exceptionally high proportion of its combat personnel.
Many boats disappeared without survivors. Their probable fates could be reconstructed only after the war through Japanese records, minefield locations, attack reports, and last known positions.
For many families, there was no final message, no witness, only a submarine that failed to return.
And the human cost did not exist on only one side. Japanese merchant crews also died in large numbers, often aboard burning ships or in open water far from rescue. Many were civilian mariners operating vessels that had become essential parts of Japan's war system.
Tonnage is how historians measure the campaign, but the ships were crewed by people. The blockade succeeded because it destroyed vessels, cargoes, skills, and lives.
Strategic effectiveness does not erase human consequence.
And acknowledging that consequence does not erase the campaign's strategic importance. By the beginning of 1945, the American submarine campaign had largely shattered Japan's maritime transportation system.
Oil movement from Southeast Asia had nearly ceased. Surviving merchant vessels increasingly remained in port, hugged coastlines, operated at night, or sought refuge in protected internal waters. Submarines were beginning to run out of ocean-going targets, which was one of the clearest indicators of campaign success.
The absence of targets had become evidence.
Yes, the campaign was no longer measured only by how many ships were being sunk. It was measured by how few ships Japan could still risk sending to sea.
In June 1945, the Navy launched Operation Barney.
9 American submarines entered the Sea of Japan through heavily mined and defended straits. Improved mine detection equipment gave them a better chance of penetrating the barriers.
The Sea of Japan had been one of the last areas Japanese shipping regarded as relatively secure.
The submarines attacked vessels along the Japanese and Korean coasts before withdrawing through La Pérouse Strait. USS Bonefish failed to return.
Even at the point of overwhelming American superiority, the campaign continued to demand lives.
Operation Barney did not determine the outcome of the war by itself, but it demonstrated that Japan no longer possessed a secure maritime sanctuary.
American submarines had moved from the outer reaches of the Pacific to waters enclosed by Japan, Korea, and the Asian mainland.
The blockade had reached inside the defensive perimeter.
Brian, let's address the largest question. Was the submarine campaign decisive?
Yes, but decisive does not mean exclusive.
Meaning submarines did not win the Pacific War alone.
Correct. Carrier aviation, surface fleets, amphibious operations, land-based bombers, aerial and submarine-laid mines, strategic bombing, the atomic bombs, Soviet entry into the war, and the threat of invasion all contributed to Japan's defeat and surrender.
But Japan could not sustain an industrial war after its merchant fleet and tanker system had been destroyed.
Right. American submarines made a decisive contribution because they progressively dismantled the maritime network connecting Japan's empire, military forces, and industrial economy.
The Joint Army-Navy Assessment Committee credited American submarines with sinking approximately 540,000 tons of Japanese naval vessels and almost 4.8 million tons of merchant shipping.
Together, those losses represented roughly 54.6% of Japanese naval and merchant vessel losses by tonnage from all causes.
More shipping than any other single Allied weapon.
The exact totals remain subject to correction. Wartime claims were frequently inflated, Japanese records were incomplete, and later research has revised individual ship identifications and attributions.
But the strategic pattern is unmistakable.
Yep. American submarines reduced imports, destroyed tanker capacity, slowed surviving convoys, killed experienced merchant sailors, forced Japan to divert escorts and aircraft, and isolated overseas garrisons.
And the effects spread beyond merchant shipping. Fuel shortages restricted fleet movement, pilot training, industrial distribution, and the ability to reinforce distant positions.
Exactly. The campaign did not merely subtract ships from a ledger. It progressively reduced the ability of the entire Japanese war system to function.
So when we call it decisive, we do not mean that one submarine fired one torpedo and ended the war.
We mean that thousands of patrols created cumulative strategic effects that Japan could not reverse.
Patrol by patrol, convoy by convoy, tanker by tanker.
Until possession of resources no longer meant access to them.
The campaign leaves us with several enduring lessons. First, possessing resources is not enough. You must be able to transport them.
Second, weapons reliability is strategic. A defective weapon affects commander confidence, tactical behavior, operational results, and ultimately, national strategy. Third, intelligence matters only when forces can act upon it. A contact report without a boat in position produces knowledge. It does not produce an interception.
Fourth, bases, repair facilities, tenders, trained labor, industrial production, and allied support are not background details.
They are combat power.
Fifth, institutions must listen to operational feedback.
And they must distinguish between operator error and equipment failure before institutional pride makes the problem more expensive.
Imagine investigating the machine before blaming every person using it.
A demanding professional standard.
Apparently.
The submarine force entered the war with capable long-range boats but an incomplete operational system. It had defective torpedoes, uneven leadership, divided command arrangements, inadequate forward support, and training assumptions that often discouraged tactical risk.
It became effective through realistic testing, command reform, intelligence integration, radar, decentralized judgment, coordinated search, industrial expansion, allied cooperation, and forward logistics.
Which makes this a Mahan episode.
Here we go.
Commerce, shipping, overseas bases, merchant fleets, control of maritime communications. Mahan.
Friction, adaptation, uncertainty, human judgment. Totally my man Clausewitz.
Mahan explains what had to move.
Clausewitz explains why moving it became so difficult.
That is not entirely unreasonable.
I am sorry, did Brian just concede Clausewitz territory?
Limited territorial access.
Are we having an intellectual custody dispute?
Possibly.
I get Clausewitz on weekends.
That seems excessive.
Brian, history is Clausewitz waiting for everyone else to catch up.
I remain confident that is not how intellectual history works.
And yet you keep inviting me back.
The arrangement is complicated.
There are charts, aren't there?
Several.
And we'll leave it there for now. Wait, how long is this episode? Oh my goodness, Brian, we didn't record a podcast. We commissioned a naval deployment.
At least the logistics section is now fully justified. Let's wrap things up.
Okay, that wraps up episode 76 of Mill History Talk. Silent Blockade, the U.S. submarine war against Japan.
The submarine campaign was not a simple story of technological superiority or uninterrupted success. It began with retreat, defective weapons, cautious doctrine, divided commands, and institutions reluctant to admit failure.
But the force learned. It tested its weapons, changed commanders, integrated intelligence, improved radar and tactics, expanded its bases, and built a sustained offensive against Japanese shipping. The campaign's greatest achievement was not simply the number of ships sunk. It was the destruction of the maritime process connecting Japan's resources, industries, fleets, armies, and overseas possessions. The submarines turned control of the sea into economic and military isolation.
For listeners who want to explore the subject further, Clay Blair's Silent Victory, the U.S. submarine war against Japan, remains a major operational history of the campaign.
And Alfred Thayer Mahan's The Influence of Sea Power Upon History provides a broader framework for understanding why commerce, bases, merchant shipping, and maritime communications matter.
The episode notes include a link to our Substack page, where listeners can find the supporting article and additional material on the Pacific submarine campaign.
Follow the podcast, share the episode, and leave us a review.
Reviews should reflect the listener's independent judgment.
Brian is being held hostage by professional standards.
I am sitting in my own office.
Exactly what professional standards would require you to say.
Wars are fought by people, but sustained by logistics. And an empire loses freedom of action when it can no longer move what it needs across the sea.
Sometimes that strategic collapse begins with a submarine captain looking through a periscope and thinking, that tanker looks expensive. I'm Hope.
And I'm Brian.
Thanks for listening to Mill History Talk. Keep reading history, question tidy explanations, listen to operational feedback, and always, test your torpedoes before beginning a transoceanic war.
Sound advice.